So there's one thing we have to get out of the way immediately. Integers are really, really, really important. Why do I say this? There was this guy called Pythagoras, sneaky bastard. I bet all of you know him from high school, right? You remember that deadlift formula that he created and you had to memorize it thousands and thousands of times and use it over and over again. Well, people died for this formula. I'm not shitting you. In the past, he had an army of worshippers who basically said that only integers and their quotients can be realistic and can be numbers. Now, there was a guy called Hippasus who said, wait a second, but there's this thing called the square root of 2. That should work, no? Well, he fucking died. That's what happened. He got thrown off that fucking ship right there, which you see. Putting all the murder stuff aside, though, Pythagoras was kind of an okay guy, and he had pretty good research as well, particularly good research in sound theory.
Right, so Pythagoras was interested in what makes some intervals, as in two pitches, two musical sounds at the same time, that's an interval. So what makes some intervals sound nice together and others not? Ákos, can we show an interval? That's an interval. Okay.
So let's talk about intervals, okay? So there's a story. There's always a freaking story, right? So Pythagoras, our antagonist or protagonist, both at the same time, he was walking on the streets and he basically said, what is this interesting sound? And he went by this blacksmith and he heard that when the blacksmith hit an iron that was twice as long as the other one, it sounded pretty good. So this brought him an idea that maybe numbers that are close to each other and their ratios can give good sounds. So let's try out the first one, the 1-to-1, which we call the unison. This was the same sound, okay? And now let's try the octave, which is 2-to-1. Good. So basically he had this experiment and then he went on, and then let's go on.
Right, so what he saw at the blacksmith is that the blacksmith was hitting irons of different length. And the numbers that you've seen on the screen is the length of the iron. So if you hit two iron pieces of the same length, they will produce the same sound. That's 1-to-1. That's a unison. That sounds good. And if you hit one piece of iron and another one that's twice as long, that's an octave. That's also very nice. If you hit one that's like 1 long and one that's like 1.7 long, that's not nice. So that's what he found, is that you have to find pieces of iron that are in proportion to each other, that can be described with very low integers, such as 1-to-1 or 1-to-2. So far, so good? Awesome. Of course, when I say pieces of iron, this can be generalized as frequencies. So if you take the normal musical A, that's generally understood to be 440 hertz, then the 880, which is exactly the double, should be an octave higher, and that sounds very nice. Now the next interval that we are going to take is called the fifth. The octave, the interval before, is actually so nice that it's understood to be the same sound. So if you take a note and then an octave higher, that's understood to be the same note, it's just higher. Even in the musical alphabet, the letters start from A, go all the way to G, and then start again from A. So if you get an octave higher, you're saying that's the same sound, just a higher variant of that. However, a fifth, which is the proportion of 3-to-1, say an iron piece that's like 2 whatever's length, and then another one that's 3 whatever's, that's a different sound. So can we do a fifth? That's a fifth. And if you take the octave, take the fifth, that's smaller, and then add the rest to add it up to an octave, that's a fourth, which is also Oh, that's screwed up. That should be 4 to the 3. So can we show fourth? That's the fourth. There is one tiny problem though. If you start tuning a piano and you start like at a very low note, you say, okay, this is like 20 hertz. Let's say that's 20 hertz. You start tuning the octaves. You just step as many steps as you have to, and then, okay, that's the double. Okay, again, that's the double of the before, that's the double. Okay, and then you have tuned all of your octaves. Cool? You start again at the bottom, and you start tuning your fifths. You step 5 steps forward, and then 5 and 5 and 5, and you always multiply the hertz number with 1.5, right? That's 2 to 3. That's 3 to 2. So once again, after a while, you will hit the same spot. That's like the least common multiple of the two numbers, and you should arrive at the same spot, right? You should arrive to somewhere. You won't. There is a gap, unfortunately. So what you can do to decide what's happening there, this metaphor shows basically steps. You have to take a very weird step and do a very weird kind of fifth. This is called the wolf fifth because it howls like a wolf. Ákos?
Let's go on. Let's look at the thirds. So let's demonstrate 5 to 4 first. And then 6 to 5. A fun fact about these is that if you were living a couple of hundred years ago in the medieval ages and you were, let's say, a composer at some church or something, the reverend came up to you and he told you, no, this is disgusting, stop doing it. Right, so this is how basically people conceived the thirds in the medieval ages. And the interesting thing is that, you know, taste changes. People think that now the thirds are pretty good. So you know, this is just a good example of how in the future things and sounds could change, right?
And at the end of the presentation, we also prepared a bit of a visual metaphor for those of you who might feel more at home at visuals than sounds. So if you imagine a color wheel, oh, thank you. It's kind of like the sound. So if you start at some sign, that's as if you started at some point at the color wheel. And as you increase the frequency of the sound, that is, you're going to higher and higher notes, that's like going around the color wheel. And hitting the same spot again is the same sound an octave higher. So if you only work with unisons and octaves, it's as if you only back, go back. It's as if you only used one color from the color wheel. So that's basically always the same color. So you're in the safe. But let's say you need more colors in your presentation or in your whatever than that. So you go, okay, I'm going to choose 2 colors, but they're going to be complementary colors because those are going to go well together. That's as if you chose the bass sound and the fifth, and those are always going to work together. And then if you even want to go further, let's say you choose even the thirds, that's kind of as if you had chosen 3 different points evenly distributed on the color wheel. And then you have 3 different colors that you can use in your presentation, and that will go nicely together. But of course, as you get closer and closer to the colors, then you're more and more in the danger of building something ugly, because you shouldn't use colors that are very close to each other. They are going to bash and collide, and they're not going to look nice. So just as kind of a presentation, the last color wheel kind of shows our current musical scale right now. You might have heard this in school. That's Do, Re, Mi, Fa, Sol, La, Ti. That's the 7 points on the color wheel. And those are like all the colors that you should be using if you were a visual. In the metaphor that describes you as a visual person instead of a composer using sounds. I hope that made some kind of sense.
Cool. So conclusion is, make sure that you hate the square root of 2, just like all Pythagoreans did. And so Marta asked me to close this presentation, and in the notes he suggested that I take off my clothes. So there you go. We are not wearing shoes. So thank you very much for your attention.
Questions? Armin?
So what about these weird, like, Asian and I don't know, scales that are not based on this European 7 scale?
We don't talk about them, not in this room.
Yes, there are different understandings and different musical systems. Because we only had 10 minutes, we just chose the European standard music history and theory. But thank you for your addition.
Very useful, Armin. Thank you.
Thank you for rendering our point invalid.
More questions?
You won't be bullied, I promise.
Thank you.